There are conversations that everybody is having, and then there are the conversations nobody is having yet. Today on Braincast FM, we're having the second kind. I'm Kate Owens, Marcus Hale is right here, and we are talking about a leaked transcript of a street conversation between a fan named Billy and a comic book storekeeper about Daredevil joining the Avengers. Hit the intro right now, director, before we start throwing coffee at each other.
I mean, considering the sheer volume of caffeine you've consumed in the last 12 hours, that's not even a metaphor. I'm actually in the splash zone right now.
Okay, look, I admit I'm operating on a slightly elevated frequency right now, but I have a valid excuse, man. I legitimately do. Because to fully prep my brain for this deep dive, for you, our listener, I ended up rewatching the entire Captain America saga this week. All of it. 3 separate times.
3 times in 1 week.
Yes. The first time, my partner basically dragged me to the couch. It was, non-negotiable household bonding. Then the second time, my nephews were visiting, and they were absolutely begging to catch it on the last week of the theatrical re-release run. So I sat through it again.
Right.
And then the third time was literally last night. It was 2 a.m. I was staring at the ceiling, and I just realized I needed to study the team dynamics one more time. So I brewed this massive, pitch-black, dark roast coffee just to get my head right for the leak we're dissecting today.
So you're basically running on espresso and, like, Steve Rogers' righteous indignation. Got it.
Exactly. And you, listening to this right now, you need to understand why this specific leak demanded that level of obsessive prep. We are setting the table today with something so incredibly rare. This isn't, it's not a studio press release.
Definitely not.
It's not some sanitized interview on a late night show where actors give PR-approved sound bites. This is a raw, secretly recorded audio transcript from a local comic book store lounge. Just 2 guys. The transcript just calls him Billy and the guy who runs the store.
Yeah, they're just sitting around.
Right. And they accidentally construct one of the most brilliant, structurally sound pieces of narrative analysis I think I've ever encountered.
It's the kind of unscripted debate you really only get when people know the mechanics of these universes inside and out.
Which is why I have to put this out there immediately. Whoever secretly recorded this and sent it to braincastfm@gmail.com, you are an absolute legend. I mean it. Keep sending these leaks to braincastfm@gmail.com, guys, because this is exactly the kind of gold we need to deconstruct.
It's totally unfiltered.
It's unfiltered, it's passionate, and it forces us to look at this universe from a completely different angle. So let me give you the mission for today's deep dive. The entire debate hinges on Matt Murdock. Daredevil.
Right, the street level stuff.
Yeah. Billy, the fan, is making this incredibly aggressive case that street-level heroes, specifically Matt, but extending to characters like Frank Castle, are not just fun little cameos. He argues they are absolutely essential pieces of the Avengers puzzle.
And the storekeeper's just not buying it.
Not at all. The storekeeper pushes back, arguing that putting a guy from Hell's Kitchen next to literal gods and alien armadas is narratively absurd. And I'll be honest with you, when I first owned this transcript, I firmly planted my flag on the storekeeper's side.
Wait, really? You're immediately against the idea?
Oh, completely. Man, think about the baseline reality of the Avengers. We are talking about cosmic war zones. We are talking about stopping celestial beings from cracking the earth in half.
That's true, yeah.
Matt Murdock is a blind lawyer who beats up mobsters in dark alleys. Throwing him into a fight against interdimensional titans feels, disjointed, it feels forced. You are bringing a guy with a pair of sticks to a thermonuclear conflict.
It's interesting you phrase it that way, actually, because, hold on, I'm scrolling through this transcript right now. Billy actually tackles that exact hesitation. He calls it the power scaling trap.
Right. And this is where we really need to unpack the psychology of how we consume these movies. Billy points out that for the last decade, you and I and everyone else in the audience, we've been conditioned by billion-dollar CGI budgets.
Yeah, the spectacle of it all.
Exactly. We have been trained to evaluate a character's worth entirely by what he calls their explosive yield.
I love that term, explosive yield. It perfectly captures how the debates usually go on the forums.
It really does. When you sit down in a theater, you unconsciously ask, like, how hard does this person hit? What is the megaton capacity of the energy beam they shoot out of their hands?
Can they punch a Leviathan out of this guy?
Exactly. Because the Avengers operate on a god-tier level, your brain assumes the entry requirement is godhood, or, at least a suit of weaponized armor or super soldier serum. We judge narrative importance entirely through the lens of raw, destructive power.
Right.
So if you use that metric, then yeah, Daredevil is a massive liability.
But look at how Billy systematically dismantles that metric. Let me check the exact phrasing here. Okay, he points straight to the Battle of Earth, the absolute apex of cosmic conflict in this universe.
The endgame of endgame, yeah.
Right. And he reminds the storekeeper that standing right there in the middle of the crater were Black Widow, Hawkeye, and Ant-Man. Biologically normal humans.
Okay, yes, biologically normal.
They don't have vibranium bones. They don't have magical runes. They're relying entirely on shrinking tech, bows, and elite gymnastics. And yet they stood on the front line against the absolute meat grinder of an alien invasion.
Yeah, that's...
Billy's argument is that if the narrative can support Clint Barton surviving that, the explosive yield argument is already invalid.
I see the logic, I really do. And Billy goes even deeper into this concept of the endurance factor, which is fascinating. He asks the storekeeper to look at the mathematical viability of a guy who actively chooses to step into the meat grinder of Hell's Kitchen every single night.
It's just a completely different philosophy of survival.
Exactly, because think about the psychological toll. Billy describes a man who gets his ribs cracked, his jaw fractured, his lungs bruised by pipe-wielding thugs on a Tuesday. He doesn't have a healing factor, man.
No Wolverine claws here.
He doesn't have a Stark Tech medical pod. He wakes up on Wednesday, spits blood into his bathroom sink, wraps his hands in sheep tape, and goes back out into the cold to do it again. Billy argues that this relentless, punishing cycle transforms Matt into this borderline superhuman engine of endurance.
You know, scanning the forums right now, someone actually just brought up the perfect parallel to this. They referenced the opening sequence of Age of Ultron. That assault on the Snowy Force base.
Oh, right, where they're hitting the Strucker bunker.
Yeah. During that raid, Clint takes a hit from an energy weapon, and the entire team dynamic has to shift. Natasha has to pull him out of the line of fire, patch him up, and call for immediate medical evac to the Kinshet. Billy's point in the transcript is that Matt Murdock takes worse damage than that on a random Thursday and just keeps fighting.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a team of billionaires pulling him to safety.
Okay, but this is exactly where I was pushing back while reading it, because I'm sitting there holding my coffee thinking, all right, sure, Matt has an insane pain tolerance, but Clint Barton had exploding arrows.
True, he had range.
He had trick shots that could take down a Chitauri chariot in one hit. Natasha had electroshock gauntlets that could short-circuit alien tech. Matt has sticks. 2 pieces of wood held together by a wire. You cannot club a space worm to death with a baton, man.
You're still caught in the explosive yield trap, though. You're still looking for the big boom.
I know. It is so hard to shake that conditioning. But I will admit, reading Billy's defense of that endurance factor, it forces you to look at narrative value differently.
Yep.
A character who simply refuses to stay down brings a completely different kind of gravity to a story. It grounds the scene. Even if I was still skeptical about him actually punching an alien, Billy was making me realize that raw power isn't the only currency on a battlefield.
And that realization is exactly what Billy uses to transition into his strongest argument, because he realizes the storekeeper is stuck on the battlefield logistics. So Billy pivots entirely. He moves the conversation off the battlefield and introduces the Domino Theory.
Man, the Domino Theory. This is the exact moment in the transcript where I had to stop, take a breath, and reevaluate everything I thought I knew about how these writers structure their universe.
It completely reframes the mechanics of the storytelling. Billy argues that an Avengers-level threat isn't solved by putting your strongest fighter in a ring with their strongest fighter.
No, it's not.
It's solved by an incredibly delicate sequence of events. It's a massive chessboard, and a character's value is about whether they are the essential piece that allows the next piece to move.
Which ties back perfectly to those 3 Captain America rewatches I forced myself through this week. Because when you really study the architecture of those movies, and I know you have all our old notes on this pulled up somewhere on your laptop, you see this exact chain reaction.
Yeah, hold on. I'm looking at the timeline right now, and Billy maps it out flawlessly for the storekeeper. He traces the entire salvation of the universe back to one deeply personal street-level tragedy. He says, look at the Winter Soldier.
Right.
If Bucky Barnes hadn't been manipulated into doing what he did to Tony Stark's parents, the Avengers never fracture. There is no civil war.
Right, and if the Avengers don't fracture, Tony Stark never feels that desperate, profound need to bolster his ranks. He never goes to an apartment in Queens to recruit a teenager in sweatpants.
And if Spider-Man doesn't get brought into the fold, who was there during the invasion of New York to sneak onto Ebony Maw's ship? Who remembers the plot of an old alien movie well enough to blow a hole in the hull and save Doctor Strange?
Peter does. A kid from Queens saves the Sorcerer Supreme.
Exactly. And without Strange surviving that specific encounter, there's no one on Titan to look forward into time. No one to view the 14 million alternate futures.
Yeah.
No one to ensure Tony survives on Titan so he can be there years later to invent time travel. The entire universe is ultimately saved because decades prior, a traumatized soldier in Brooklyn was struggling with his programming.
You see how brilliant that is? When you step back and look at the Jenga tower the writers built, Endgame wasn't won because Thor hit harder than everyone else. Think about it.
He definitely hit the hardest.
Thor was the most powerful being on that field, and his raw power wasn't the deciding factor. The universe was saved by this massive, fragile rope woven together from completely separate, seemingly insignificant threads.
Billy throws out a few more examples of these dominoes, and they really prove the point. Take Ant-Man. If a random rat doesn't crawl across a control panel in a storage van, Scott Lang stays trapped in the quantum realm.
Oh, the rat, the most important rat in cinematic history.
Exactly. If Scott doesn't escape, the concept of a time heist is never pitched to Tony. If Tony doesn't build the nanotech gauntlet, he can't seamlessly strip the stones from Thanos' hand during their final physical struggle. No nanotech, no snap. The universe falls to ash. All because of a guy who shrinks and talks to ants.
Or look at the Deadpool domino. Billy brings this up, and it is wild. He points out that if Wade Wilson hadn't fallen in love with Vanessa, he never would have been desperate enough to seek out that sketchy underground cure.
Right.
He never becomes Deadpool. If he doesn't become Deadpool, he never draws the attention of the TVA, he never goes tearing across the multiverse to find a broken Wolverine, and he never stops Cassandra Nova from shredding reality. They literally save the entire multiverse, and the Avengers aren't even aware it's happening.
It really forces you to completely abandon the idea that powerful means important.
It totally does. And reading that, I felt this massive shift in my own perspective. I was genuinely frustrated with myself for not seeing the narrative architecture that way before. Because once you accept the domino theory, the argument against Daredevil completely evaporates. Why couldn't Matt Murdock be the guy who tips the crucial domino? He doesn't need to punch Thanos in the jaw.
Right. He just needs to be in the right place.
He just needs to uncover the right piece of corrupt paperwork or pull the one specific whistleblower out of a burning building in Hell's Kitchen to set the Avengers on the exact path they need to win.
But the storekeeper doesn't just roll over here. He accepts the domino theory, sure, but he throws a massive caveat back at Billy. He says, okay, you can't just broadly compare Matt to someone like Natasha Romanoff to justify his presence.
Right, because Natasha was never just a fighter, she was a master spy. The storekeeper points out that she was an intelligence asset, a master manipulator, and essentially the psychological glue that kept an entire team of massive, volatile egos from killing each other.
She kept them all in check.
Her value was in her espionage and her strategy. So the storekeeper challenges Billy, what is Matt's unique utility? If he's not the tech genius and he's not the super spy, what specific function does he serve on that chessboard that no one else can?
Let me tell you, the forums are having an absolute field day with Billy's answer to this. Because Billy doesn't compare Matt to Natasha. He compares Daredevil's radar sense directly to Spider-Man's danger sense.
Oh, this was masterful. Let's talk about the No Way Home brick scene, because if you want to understand how a writer demonstrates unique utility without a massive explosion, this is the textbook example.
Now, I've actually got the breakdown right here. Billy points to that scene where Peter, Aunt May, and Happy are sitting around the dining table with Matt Murdock, discussing the legal fallout of Peter's identity being revealed. Yes. Suddenly, a brick comes crashing through the window behind them.
And Peter's a kid with superhuman reflexes and a precognitive warning system, doesn't sense it coming. His spider sense completely fails him in that moment.
Because, as Billy breaks down, Peter's danger sense is highly specific. It's an alarm bell that alerts him to general danger directed at him.
Yes.
It tells his body to move, but it doesn't give him a data readout. It doesn't tell him who threw the object, what the object is, how fast it's moving, or the exact trajectory. But Matt just reaches out and catches the brick before it hits Peter, without even turning his head.
Without looking.
Yeah.
And Billy explains the mechanics of why that happens so perfectly. You have to understand how Matt processes the world. His superhuman senses aren't a reflex, man.
No, they're always on.
They are a constant, hyperactive state of data collection. He is endlessly calculating the who, what, where, when, and how of his entire physical environment. He hears the spike in the heartbeat of the protester standing outside. He hears the subtle shift of fabric as the guy rears his arm back. He registers the air displacement of the brick the millisecond it shatters the glass. He calculates its mass, its velocity, and its exact trajectory in real time. It's not magic, it is mathematically precise sensory mapping.
Which fundamentally changes his role. He's not just a guy who's good at martial arts. He is a walking surveillance network.
And then Billy stacks the legal superpower on top of that, and I lost my mind. I was so hyped reading this section because we get so distracted by the red suit and the acrobatics that we forget. Matt Murdock is a brilliant Ivy League-educated defense attorney.
Yeah, he has a day job.
His entire civilian life is dedicated to untangling systemic corruption, navigating labyrinthine legal conspiracies, and breaking witnesses on the stand.
Billy asks a brilliant hypothetical here. He says, okay, Tony Stark, or Shuri in Wakanda, could easily build the world's most advanced biometric lie detector. But can that machine detect what Matt Murdock can detect?
No, it absolutely cannot. An AI can measure a pulse, sure, but an AI cannot understand the psychological nuance of human deceit. A machine cannot comprehend the subtle manipulation tactics a villain is using.
Can't feel the context.
Exactly. It can't feel the specific flutter of guilt or the sudden, sharp spike of genuine panic over a loved one just by listening to a heartbeat through a concrete wall. That makes Matt Murdock an intelligence asset on a level that billions of dollars of Stark tech could never replicate.
Wow.
He is a human lie detector who also possesses a profound understanding of the legal loopholes these massive villains use to hide their operations. You drop that specific skill set into an Avengers narrative, and suddenly you aren't writing an action movie anymore. You are writing a high-stakes espionage thriller.
Which provides the absolute perfect segue into the next phase of the transcript.
Right.
Because if Matt Murdock is the ultimate truth seeker, the guy who uncovers the conspiracy, what happens when that conspiracy requires a level of violence the Avengers refuse to commit?
Oh, boy.
The conversation inevitably shifts to the Punisher.
Okay, I have to be completely honest with you. When I first saw the words Punisher and Avengers in the same sentence in this leak, my brain short-circuited.
It's jarring.
I was picturing Frank Castle putting on one of those matching white Quantum Realm suits, standing next to Captain America and gruffly yelling, "Avengers Assemble." It sounded like an SNL sketch. It felt so wrong.
The storekeeper had the exact same reaction. He basically laughed Billy off. But Billy immediately corrects the framing. He says Frank Castle isn't joining the roster. Frank Castle is crashing into the team.
Crashing into the team. That changes everything. We are totally redefining what a crossover means in this context, because Frank is a catalyst character. Think about the operational realities of the Avengers. They are a massive, highly visible organization.
Right, they're basically a military branch.
They have to follow UN protocols, they engage in diplomacy, they have PR nightmares to worry about, collateral damage reports, and international treaties. They operate with authority.
And Frank operates with impunity.
Exactly. While the Avengers are sitting in a briefing room waiting for satellite clearance, Frank Castle is already 3 steps ahead of them because he tracked down the mid-level supplier, tied him to a radiator in a basement, and extracted the exact location of the threat using a blowtorch and a pair of pliers.
It introduces this massive, uncomfortable friction. It stops being a clean narrative about heroes shooting lasers at a CGI army.
Exactly. It becomes an ideological war. Frank forces the Avengers to confront the trolley problem. The Avengers show up to a warehouse and say, "Stand down, Castle, there has to be another way."
And Frank just looks at them.
Yeah, he just looks at them covered in blood and says, "No, there doesn't. And while you guys were debating morals, I actually stopped the bomb." As Billy points out, the absolute best comic book stories are the ones where the squeaky clean heroes are forced to confront the ugly, horrific reality that their diplomatic methods might be completely inadequate to stop the threat.
The forums are eating up the hypothetical plot, Billy pitches. To illustrate this, let me just, he sketches out a scenario to show exactly how you bridge the gap between this street and the sky.
Oh, this pitch was incredible. Walk through it, because this is how you build a narrative.
Okay, so Billy suggests a storyline where the Kingpin realizes he needs more than just thugs to maintain his empire. So he starts quietly acquiring highly advanced leftover tech. Maybe it's Stark drone parts or salvaged Chitauri weapons for the Battle of New York, similar to what the Vulture was doing.
Right, an organized crime syndicate weaponizing cosmic debris.
So the Punisher starts tracking this new, highly lethal hardware hitting the streets. He follows the bloody trail of bodies, and that trail leads him straight up the corporate ladder, right to the doorstep of Stark Industries.
Man.
Suddenly, Frank Castle's violent crusade is intersecting with Sam Wilson's Captain America. Or Pepper Potts. Maybe the tech has dimensional properties, so Dr. Strange detects a massive anomaly and steps in.
And it just escalates organically. Billy even throws out the idea that Kingpin, realizing he's out of his depth, might form an alliance of convenience with someone like Dr. Doom.
Oh, that's good.
Doom uses Fisk to handle the messy street-level logistics of a much larger global plan. Now you have a scenario where Frank Castle is indiscriminately crossing moral lines that the Avengers absolutely refuse to cross. And why does Matt Murdock enter the narrative?
To stop Frank.
Yes, it's not because Nick Fury shows up in his apartment with a polite invitation. Matt gets dragged into the chaos solely to stop Frank from burning the city down.
That is the structural genius of it. Matt doesn't join the Avengers. He collides with them because Frank is creating such a massive geopolitical headache that Matt has to intervene before Frank executes a key witness the Avengers desperately need alive.
Yes, and you know what I loved even more? How the storekeeper tweaks Billy's pitch. Because Billy's initial idea was that Frank does the dirty work, saves the day, and the movie essentially proves that Frank's lethal methods were 100% right all along.
Right, which is a bit much.
But the storekeeper stops him and says, hold on. Marvel would never validate Frank's worldview that cleanly. It's too neat.
It removes the complexity entirely.
Right. If Frank is just right, there's no tension. The storekeeper suggests a much messier gray area. What if Frank successfully stops the immediate threat, but in doing so, he puts a bullet in the one person who knew the passcode to disarm a much larger global threat?
Oh, wow.
Frank solves the street-level problem, but accidentally triggers the Avengers-level crisis. Matt is furious because Frank crossed the line and ruined the investigation. But Matt also has to swallow his pride and admit that Frank uncovered a massive conspiracy that the Avengers, with all their satellites, were completely blind to.
And the character that ties that entire complex ecosystem together is the Kingpin.
The Kingpin Bridge. Man, this was the exact paragraph where I realized I was fully converting to Billy's side. Because Wilson Fisk is the ultimate narrative connective tissue. Think about his function.
She's everywhere.
He is street level enough and brutal enough to be a visceral physical threat to Daredevil in a hallway fight. He is deeply embedded enough in the criminal underworld to be right in the crosshairs of the Punisher.
But at the same time,
he is wealthy enough, ambitious enough, and politically insulated enough to buy black market Stark tech. He can sit at a table and negotiate with foreign governments or even cosmic threats without blinking.
he scales perfectly up and down the narrative ladder.
He does. He is the elevator between the gutter and the penthouse. So Matt doesn't need to fly to space to be relevant. He's just chasing Fisk. Fisk is being hunted by Frank. Frank steps on Sam Wilson's toes. Sam calls in Dr. Strange because the tech is weird. It's a natural, chaotic, completely believable escalation. It makes perfect sense.
Which really highlights how much of this is driven by audience demand and how fans interact with the material. Billy and the storekeeper move into this fascinating final section, where they analyze how Marvel actually tests these waters.
You know what? Before we jump into the business side of this, I am just so fired up by the sheer quality of this conversation. Seriously, if you are the person who stood in the back of that comic shop, hit record on your phone and emailed this to us, hit us up at braincastfm@gmail.com. I mean it.
I need to talk to this guy.
We need your brain on this show. We need to do a live deep dive with you. Okay, sorry, let's talk about the No Way Home test because this blew my mind.
Okay, so the storekeeper floats this theory about Charlie Cox's cameo as Matt Murdock in Spider-Man: No Way Home.
Right, because if you look at the mechanics of that script, the storekeeper correctly points out that Marvel absolutely did not need to put Charlie Cox in that movie. His presence wasn't strictly necessary to advance the plot.
No, not help.
Peter Parker is in legal trouble. He could have hired any random, faceless defense attorney to deliver exposition, and the movie functions exactly the same. The storekeeper argues they put Matt in that specific scene as a temperature check.
A literal test.
Yes. They were running a multi-million-dollar diagnostic test to see if mainstream theater audiences would erupt when that white cane tapped on the floor.
And the data came back overwhelmingly positive. The reaction in theaters was massive.
It was deafening. People were cheering just as loud for a blind lawyer catching a brick as they were for the portal opening later in the movie. And this leads directly into Billy's biggest grievance in the entire league. He gets really passionate about this divide between old blood and new blood.
Yeah, I'm reading that part now.
Billy argues that Marvel has spent the last few years aggressively pushing newer characters to the forefront. He specifically calls out characters like Ironheart and projects like the Marvels, pointing out that they objectively underperformed or flopped. He even admits in the transcript that he didn't even know the Mrs. Marvel series existed until months after it aired.
He pulls no punches on the newer slate.
None at all. Billy's core thesis here is that while these newer, untested characters are struggling to find a foothold with the mainstream audience, you have characters like Daredevil, the Punisher, Blade, and Ghost Rider sitting on the bench.
Characters with real history.
Exactly. Characters who have decades of built-in goodwill. Characters who have sustained comic runs, successful television shows, and rabid, deeply invested fan bases. In Billy's eyes, these street-level icons have earned their shot at the big leagues, and Marvel is mismanaging their assets by keeping them segregated.
The storekeeper pushes back on that, though, and I think it's a vital defense of how cinematic universes have to operate to survive.
He does, and the storekeeper is totally right here. He reminds Billy that a studio has to have the right to experiment. If Marvel only ever relied on proven, guaranteed hits, we wouldn't even have the MCU as we know it today.
That's true.
The storekeeper points out that before 2014, absolutely nobody in the mainstream public knew who the Guardians of the Galaxy were. They were obscure C-list comic characters. Same with Shang-Chi. Marvel took a massive creative gamble, experimented, and turned them into absolute household names. So the act of putting new characters in the spotlight isn't inherently a bad strategy.
But even while defending the experimentation, the storekeeper concedes the deeper logistical point Billy is making.
Right. Because you can defend experimentation all day, but eventually you have to look at the board and ask a very practical question. Why keep proven, deeply loved, culturally resonant iterations of characters like Charlie Cox's Daredevil or John Brainthal's Punisher cordoned off in their own little corner of the universe, while simultaneously asking audiences to build emotional connections with a dozen brand new heroes all at once?
It's a question of utilizing your most effective narrative tools. And it's actually hilarious to look at how the fan demand has evolved over time regarding this exact issue.
What do you mean? What was the timeline?
Think back 10 years ago. When that first season of the Netflix show dropped, fans weren't asking for Matt to fight Thanos. The expectations were so low. Fans were just begging the main MCU movies to vaguely, passingly acknowledge that Daredevil existed.
Oh my God, yeah.
Like, people would have been thrilled if there was just a blurry newspaper headline about the Devil of Hell's Kitchen sitting on a desk in the background of an Iron Man movie.
Oh my God, you're right. We used to literally pause trailers and scour the background of scenes looking for Easter eggs. We were desperate for crumbs.
Exactly. We were analyzing pixelated newspapers. And now the conversation has evolved so dramatically that we're sitting here having an hour-long, highly structural debate about his specific tactical and narrative utility in defeating cosmic titans alongside Captain America.
It's wild how much the goalposts have moved.
The demand has scaled up alongside the universe. And even if a project like the New Born Again series isn't considered flawless by every single fan on the forums, the core truth remains. The audience is hungry. They want more of these characters. They want them integrated.
They want them integrated. And you know what? Reading this transcript, analyzing the Domino Theory, looking at the Kingpin Bridge, I have to formally throw in the towel here. I concede.
Wait, you are fully abandoning your original stance. Team Storekeeper is officially disbanded.
I am. My initial skepticism was completely wrong. I started this entire deep dive thinking it was fundamentally ridiculous to put a guy from Hell's Kitchen next to Thor. But I agree with the storekeeper's final realization at the end of the leak. The limitation isn't Daredevil's power set. The limitation is the writer's imagination.
That is a fantastic way to frame the entire debate.
Because if you really think about it, man, if Marvel could convince you, me, and the entire global box office that a heavily armed, cynical talking raccoon and a walking tree that only knows how to say 3 words were not just cool visual effects, but emotionally resonant, absolutely essential components to saving the entire universe.
Yeah, when you put it like that.
Then building a believable narrative bridge for Matt Murdock is entirely possible. It just requires a writer who understands the mechanics of the Jenga tower.
And probably a lot of coffee to map it all out.
Which brings up the absolute best part of this entire leaked transcript, the very end.
Yeah, the storekeeper finally reveals the real reason he stopped serving coffee to customers in the lounge area.
It is so funny. He tells Billy he had to rip the espresso machine out because if he gives comic fans access to caffeine, they will literally stay in the shop for 3 straight hours, loudly arguing that the 2008 Edward Norton Incredible Hulk movie is secretly the greatest piece of cinema the MCU ever produced.
Oh, man.
Or worse, they'll trap him behind the register trying to convince him that Jar Jar Binks was a Sith Lord orchestrating the fall of the Republic.
The hazards of caffeinated fandom. It's a dangerous ecosystem.
Truly a hazard of the trade. And after dropping that brilliant piece of lore, Billy just casually checks his watch, says he has to go pick up his girlfriend, and walks out the door, leaving this absolute masterpiece of a narrative theory just hanging in the air next to the back issues.
It's a perfect slice of life.
It really is, and it leaves us with so much to unpack. So as we wrap up this deep dive today, I want to leave you with a final thought. Something for you to mull over the next time you sit down in a theater to watch one of these massive billion-dollar superhero epics.
I'm listening.
We spent all this time talking about how street-level heroes like Matt Murdock and Frank Castle fit into the narrative puzzle, how they trigger the domino effect, or how they act as intelligence assets. But maybe the answer is even simpler than that.
How so?
Maybe the MCU needs these street-level heroes in the big cosmic battles, not to hit the villain, and not even just to uncover a conspiracy. Maybe they need them specifically to ground the stakes.
Oh, to give it scale.
Yes. Think about it. When gods fight aliens in the sky, firing neon lasers that level entire city blocks without a second thought, we visually and psychologically lose the human scale. It stops being a struggle and becomes a fireworks show.
Right, it just becomes noise.
But a guy who bleeds, a guy who gets his ribs cracked, who feels the bone-deep exhaustion of a prolonged fight, who has absolutely no magical armor to protect him, and who still forces himself to stand back up and face the impossible. That is the anchor.
The human element.
That is the anchor you desperately need to actually feel the danger. Without the man in the alleyway, the gods in the sky don't mean anything. Keep questioning the obvious. Keep looking for the conversations nobody is having yet. We will catch you on the next one. This has been Braincast FM. Director, take us out.